Everyone in the city believes this story, that the Romano bride collapsed before her wedding, that grief, pressure, or fear finally broke her, that she was quietly taken away before the guests noticed. It sounds clean, respectable, convenient. What no one knows is that 4 hours before the ceremony, the bride overheard her groom calmly ordering her death, describing it the way men discuss weather or wine. An accident, a staircase, a clean frame. What no one knows is that instead of running to her powerful father, she ran to the one man who was supposed to be blamed for her murder. She arrived at his mansion in a wedding dress stained with mud and blood, guns raised around her, her pulse louder than the chandelier above. And before anyone could pull the trigger, she said the only words that mattered. "They're going to kill me, and they're going to make you pay for it." That was the moment the wedding ended, and the war began. By the time the first wedding guest realized something was wrong, Serafina Romano was already running. She ran barefoot down a marble staircase that had been polished for celebration, not escape. Silk tangled around her legs, beaded lace caught on the banister, and tore with a sound too soft to matter. Her heart was louder than everything, louder than the distant music, louder than the murmurs downstairs, louder even than the echo of her own name being spoken like a death sentence only hours earlier. Serafina Romano had not fled because she feared marriage. She fled because she had heard herself being scheduled for death. 4 hours before the ceremony, she had been standing in the bridal suite, her reflection framed by soft light and white roses. 6 months of work rested on her body, a gown she had designed herself. Every stitch a promise to a future she never wanted but had been taught to accept. The door to the hallway had been left slightly ajar when her maid of honor stepped out for champagne. Serafina had been adjusting her veil when she heard her groom's voice. Dario Leone sounded calm, almost bored. He spoke about the wedding the way men spoke about logistics, how long it would take, who would be watching, how convincing it would look. He said the marriage would stabilize alliances. He said her father would be satisfied. Then he said the word after. After the marriage, there would be an accident, a fall, a malfunction. Something tragic but clean. Something that could be blamed on Lucian DeSantis with just enough planted evidence to make it believable. Enough to push Cassian Romano into war. Enough to let Dario step into the wreckage and claim everything that remained. Serafina had stood perfectly still, her breath shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. She had been trained her entire life to listen without reacting, to absorb uncomfortable truths with a pleasant expression. But this truth split something open inside her. She did not scream. She did not faint. She did not confront him. She did something far more dangerous. She believed him. And instead of running back to her father, who would have dragged her down the aisle and apologized for her hysteria, she made a choice that rewrote her fate. She ran to the man who was supposed to be blamed for her murder. Lucian DeSantis' mansion rose from the cliffside, like a fortress carved out of stone and shadow. When Serafina reached the gates, her lungs were burning, her gown stained with mud, her carefully pinned hair unraveling strand by strand. She barely made it through the doors before hands seized her arms and steel pressed close to her skin. Guns. Professional. Steady. The guards did not shout. They did not hesitate. They surrounded her in practiced silence, weapons trained with the kind of discipline that made survival feel uncertain rather than immediate. Serafina lifted her chin anyway, forcing her legs not to buckle. Then she heard footsteps descending from above. Lucian DeSantis appeared at the top of the staircase, tall and composed, dressed in black like a man attending a funeral rather than interrupting a potential execution. His gaze swept over her without haste, taking in the torn lace, the bare feet, the blood at her ankle, the way she stood despite everything. His eyes were the color of winter steel. Cold. Evaluating? Serafina Romano, he said. Her name measured and precise, as if he were naming a weapon instead of a woman. Cassian's daughter. In my house. Wearing a wedding dress. She swallowed. Her throat burned. "They're going to kill me," she said, the words rushing out before fear could choke them back. "And they're going to make it look like you did it." The air shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. One of the guards tightened his grip on his weapon. Lucian's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Explain," he said. It was not a request. Serafina did. She told him everything about the overheard conversation, about Dario's plan, about the accident that was supposed to end her life and begin a war. She spoke faster than she meant to, then forced herself to slow, to be precise, to give him facts instead of panic. She watched his face as she spoke, searching for disbelief, mockery, dismissal. There was none. Lucian descended the stairs one step at a time, stopping close enough that she could see the exact shade of gray in his eyes. When she finished, the silence stretched long enough to feel dangerous. "If you're lying," he said calmly, "you walked into the wrong house." "I know," Serafina replied. Her voice steadied in a way that surprised even her. "That's why I came." He studied her the way powerful men studied assets, calculating risk, potential, cost. Not once did his gaze soften. Not once did he look away. "Lower your weapons," Lucian said at last. The guns dropped, though no one relaxed. Serafina exhaled shakily, her knees threatening to give way as the immediate threat receded. Lucian reached out, catching her elbow before she fell. His touch was firm, controlled, deliberate. He released her just as quickly. "You're not a guest," he said, his voice low and even. "And you're not under my protection." Her heart sank, but she held his gaze. "Your leverage," he continued, "until I decide whether you're valuable or expendable." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they grounded her. For the first time that day, the danger felt honest. Lucian turned to his guards. "Put her in the east wing. 2 men outside the door. No contact without my approval." Serafina was escorted through halls that smelled of leather and old wood, deeper into a house that felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for judgment. She did not resist. She did not plead. As the door closed behind her, she pressed her palms to the cool glass of the window and stared out at the dark water below. She had not escaped death. She had stepped into something far worse. But beneath the fear, something unfamiliar stirred something dangerously close to hope. Because Lucian DeSantis had listened, and in a world where she had always been a bargaining chip, being heard was the most powerful thing of all. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Serafina did not sleep. The East Wing room was too quiet, too immaculate, every surface polished into impersonality. Silk sheets, a 4-poster bed, pale walls that reflected the moonlight spilling through tall windows that reinforced with decorative ironwork. A cage, disguised as comfort. She stood by the glass long after the door had closed behind her, listening to the rhythm of waves below the cliffs and the distant movement of guards outside her door. Each sound anchored her to the present. Each breath reminded her she was still alive. By dawn, the shock had burned away, leaving clarity in its place. When the knock came, she did not flinch. A woman entered, older, composed, eyes sharp enough to miss nothing. She brought clothes folded with military precision and said Lucian wanted Serafina downstairs in an hour. The woman did not ask questions. She did not express surprise at a bride in hiding. She simply glanced at the ruined gown pooling on the floor and asked if it should be cleaned. "Burn it," Serafina said quietly. The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded as if a decision had been confirmed. "As you wish." An hour later, Serafina walked into Lucian DeSantis' study stripped of lace and illusion. She wore borrowed clothes that fit well enough to suggest intention rather than charity. Her hair was damp, her face bare. She felt exposed without the armor she had been taught to wear, but also lighter, as though shedding the dress had shed a lie with it. Lucian was waiting behind his desk, reading from a tablet. He looked up once, his gaze sweeping over her with efficient appraisal. No hunger, no judgment. Assessment. "Sit," he said. She chose the edge of the chair, spine straight, hands steady in her lap. He set the tablet aside and leaned back, fingers steepled, studying her the way one studied a blueprint before demolition. "I verified part of your story," Lucian said. "Dario left the church 10 minutes after you disappeared. He told your father you were overwhelmed." A convincing performance, apparently. Serafina's jaw tightened. "My family alive," he said. "Protected? For now." The words loosened something in her chest, but she did not let relief show. Then he's buying time. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. He can't kill me yet, she said. Not without risking suspicion. He needs the marriage to settle first. He needs my absence to look temporary. But he's looking for me. Lucian's mouth curved into something not quite a smile. 3 of his men were at the train station before dawn. 2 more at the airport. He thinks you ran. Not far enough, Serafina said softly. Lucian stood and walked to the window, the city a dark sprawl beneath the pale morning sky. When he finds out you're here, he'll have a choice, he said. Come after you and confirm your story, or pretend you're dead and accelerate his timeline. And either way, Serafina said, he exposes himself. Lucian turned back to her slowly. You're observant. It's my job, she replied. I design. I notice what doesn't belong. He studied her again, longer this time. Not her face, her posture, the steadiness of her breathing, the way she held eye contact without challenge. You didn't come to me because you trusted me, Lucian said. You came because I'm the only man your father can't drag you away from. Yes, Serafina said, and because you have the most to lose if Dario succeeds. Lucian's gaze sharpened. Go on. If I die with evidence pointing to you, my father will destroy everything you've built, she said, and he'll sleep soundly doing it. Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Smart, Lucian said at last. It did not sound like praise. It sounded like evaluation. Tell me exactly what you heard, word for word. Serafina did. She closed her eyes and pulled the memory forward, forcing herself to speak slowly, precisely. She repeated Dario's timeline, his confidence, the casual cruelty with which he dismissed her life as a necessary cost. When she finished, Lucian was standing closer than before, his presence a quiet weight. What happens if you fight back, he asked. He said I wouldn't, Serafina replied. That I've been trained to sacrifice myself for family peace, that I would walk into my own execution with a smile. Something flickered in Lucian's eyes, then cold, calculating, and sharp with interest. And yet, he said, You ran? Yes. Lucian studied her as if seeing her for the first time. You chose me, he said. Not the police, not a safe house, not a flight out of the country. I chose leverage, Serafina said. And survival. Lucian laughed quietly, a sound devoid of warmth. You're negotiating, he said. I am, she agreed. And I need something in return. His brows lifted slightly. You're bold. I'm desperate, she corrected. There's a difference. What do you want, my mother? Serafina said. And my sister. If Dario realizes I'm missing, he'll use them to draw me out. I need your word that you'll protect them. Lucian regarded her in silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm enough to be dangerous. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, Serafina said evenly, I'll walk out of this house and take my chances with Dario, and you'll lose the only witness you have. Lucian held her gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled a sharp, dark curve that made her pulse jump. You ran from your wedding in a $10,000 dress, he said. Showed up at my door with nothing but a death threat and nerve. And now you're setting terms. He extended his hand. Deal. Serafina took it. His grip was firm, warm, steady. He held on just a second longer than necessary before releasing her. One more thing, Lucian said, his eyes locking onto hers. If you're lying to me, I won't kill you quickly. I'm not lying, Serafina said. Good, he replied. Then welcome to your new reality. As she was escorted back to the East Wing, Serafina understood the truth she had been avoiding since the moment she ran. She had not escaped danger. She had simply traded one executioner for another, but this one listened. And in that difference lay the beginning of everything that followed. By the 3rd day, Lucian DeSantis stopped pretending Serafina was only a liability. He did not announce the change. He simply began to include her. It started quietly, almost deceptively so. A chair placed closer to the long table in his study. A tablet slid in her direction without comment. Conversations that did not pause when she entered the room. His people spoke around her at first, then to her, then when patterns began to emerge because of her. Serafina listened more than she spoke. She had learned early that silence invited revelation. She cataloged voices, postures, habits, the way men sat when they believed themselves safe, the way they stood when they lied. She noticed who touched nothing and who touched everything, who drank the whiskey and who let it sit untouched. Lucian watched all of this from a distance that never felt accidental. They were reviewing footage from a charity gala when it happened. The kind of event designed to look harmless crystal glasses, soft lighting, expensive smiles masking transactions that never appeared on paper. Lucian's analysts dissected the room with practiced efficiency, pointing out known faces, alliances, threats. Serafina leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That man," she said quietly. Lucian glanced at her. "Which one?" She moved closer to the screen, her finger hovering just short of touching it. The one in the background. Gray suit, standing too still. One of Lucian's men frowned. "He's nobody. Low-level security." "No," Serafina said. "He wants to be invisible. That's different." Lucian gestured for the footage to pause. "Why him?" She studied the frozen image. "His watch is expensive. His cufflinks are not. That's not an oversight. It's a choice made by someone trying to look established without understanding how wealth actually wears itself." She shifted her gaze slightly, and he keeps glancing at the woman in red. Every third look, not desire, attention. Lucian followed her line of sight. What does she matter? "The dress," Serafina said. 2 seasons old, not vintage, not intentional. In that room. That means she either can't afford better or doesn't care who notices. Both are dangerous. Silence fell. Lucian studied the paused image again, this time with different eyes. "Names," he said. "Franco Delgado," one of his men said after a moment. "Minor enforcer. Ambitious. The woman is his sister. Teresa. She works for Cassian Romano." Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. Lucian looked at her sharply. "You didn't know that." "No," she said. "But I know when someone doesn't belong where they are." Lucian dismissed the room with a flick of his hand. When the door closed behind the last man, the space seemed to contract. He turned to her slowly. "You just connected 2 points my analysts missed," he said. "In under a minute." Serafina met his gaze. "Because they were looking for weapons," she said. "Not people." His eyes darkened with interest. "You're not just a witness." She said nothing. She had learned not to rush men like Lucian to conclusions they preferred to reach themselves. The work intensified after that. Serafina was brought files movement logs, financial records, photographs from events she had attended but never truly seen. She found inconsistencies where others found noise. A driver who wore a different watch to meetings with Dario than he did with her father. A lawyer who carried the same briefcase everywhere except one Thursday night. A woman who ordered wine twice and never drank it. Each detail unraveled something. Each thread led somewhere darker. Lucian's people began to defer to her without comment. It unsettled them. She could tell. She was too quiet, too composed, not hungry for power in the way they understood. Lucian watched it happen with an expression that revealed nothing. It was late when the mistake was made. Serafina noticed it only afterward, the way the room shifted when she pointed out a discrepancy in a shipment manifest. The way one of the men at the table stilled, just for half a second too long. She filed the reaction away. But the damage was done. That night, Lucian called her into his study alone. "You were right," he said without preamble. "About the shipment." "Then why do you look like something went wrong?" she asked. "Because someone realized they've been seen," Lucian replied. "And Dario doesn't forgive exposure." The words settled heavily between them. "My sister," Serafina said quietly. Lucian's jaw tightened. "She's being watched. Not harmed. Not yet." But the implication was clear. Serafina closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She had known this was coming, had known the moment she stepped into Lucian's world that every insight carried a price. "This is my fault," she said. "No," Lucian replied. "It's the cost of being useful." She looked at him then. really looked at him. At the man who commanded fear without raising his voice, who calculated destruction the way others calculated profit. "And what do you do?" she asked softly, "when the cost becomes unacceptable?" Lucian studied her for a long moment. Something unreadable passed through his gaze. "I changed the rules," he said. The next day, Serafina was no longer kept in the background. Lucian placed her beside him in meetings, not as decoration, not as proof of dominance, as presence, as warning. He let people see her alive, see her thinking, see her speaking. Dario would hear about it. Lucian made sure of that. By evening, the message arrived. Not a threat, not an apology. A reminder. A photograph appeared on Lucian's desk without explanation. Serafina's sister stepping into a car. Safe, unharmed, watched. Lucian's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Serafina felt the fear rise, but beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve, clarity. The sharp understanding that running had ended the moment she walked into Lucian DeSantis' house. "I won't disappear again," she said quietly. Lucian looked at her, something fierce and approving glinting briefly in his eyes. "Good," he replied, "because neither will he." For the first time since the wedding that never happened, Serafina understood the shape of the war she had entered, and she was no longer invisible within it. Once Serafina stepped fully into Lucian DeSantis' world, there was no returning to invisibility. The house adjusted around her presence with quiet efficiency. Guards no longer announced her movements. Doors opened before she reached them. Information flowed toward her without being requested. Files left on the desk as if she had always belonged there. It should have felt like privilege. Instead, it felt like gravity and acknowledgement that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Lucian placed her beside him deliberately, not behind him, not across the room, at his right hand. Men noticed. They always did. Some hid their surprise better than others, schooling their expressions into neutrality. A few watched her with thinly veiled resentment, others with something closer to curiosity. Serafina met every look without flinching, her posture calm, her voice measured when she spoke. She did not overreach. She did not shrink. Lucian said nothing about the shift. He simply allowed it to happen. The work intensified. Meetings bled into one another. Nights shortened by the relentless pressure of a clock Dario Leone had started and could no longer afford to stop. Serafina learned the cadence of Lucian's operation, the speed at which decisions were made, the tolerance for error, the cost of hesitation. She learned which questions were welcomed and which were traps. And she learned something else, more dangerous than all of it. She learned how easily information could become leverage. The photograph of her sister remained on Lucian's desk, untouched but never out of sight. A reminder without words. Serafina did not ask for updates. She knew better. She watched instead, listening for the subtle shifts in tone that indicated escalation. It came sooner than she expected. The mistake was small, insignificant on paper. A minor inconsistency in a financial report tied to one of Dario's shell companies. Serafina noticed it during a late-night review, pointed it out with the same quiet certainty she had applied to everything else. The room adjusted around the observation. Lucian's people moved quickly, efficiently, too efficiently. Lucian caught it at the same moment she did, the way one of his lieutenants went still, the way his eyes flicked, just once, toward the door before returning to the table. It was enough. After the meeting dispersed, Lucian remained standing by the window, his back to the room. Serafina waited, her instincts tightening like wire. "He knows," Lucian said without turning. "Because of me?" she replied. Yes. The admission did not come with accusation. That almost made it worse. "What happens now?" she asked. Lucian turned slowly, his gaze sharp, calculating. "Now he reminds you that everything has a price." The reminder arrived the following morning. A package. No return address, no message. Inside, a silk scarf Serafina recognized instantly. Her sister's favorite, folded neatly, untorn, unscented, alive. For now. Serafina stared at it without touching it. She felt the familiar pull of panic, the instinct to run, to bargain, to trade herself back into silence. She did none of those things. She had learned too much to pretend ignorance now. Lucian watched her carefully. "This is not your failure," he said. "It is," Serafina replied quietly. "Because I matter to him now." Lucian's jaw tightened. "You mattered the moment you ran." "No," she said. "I mattered when I started seeing what he didn't want seen." Silence settled between them, dense and charged. Lucian moved first. He reached for the scarf and placed it back into the box with deliberate care. "Then we adjust." How, Serafina asked. "We make it clear," Lucian said, "that touching what's yours costs more than he's willing to pay." Serafina searched his face for doubt. She found none, only resolve. Dangerous, unwavering resolve. That night, Lucian changed the rules. He brought Serafina with him out of the shadows, into the open. A controlled appearance at a private gathering, carefully selected, quietly observed. Not enough to provoke outright confrontation. Enough to be noticed. D'Ario's network would hear about it within hours. Serafina wore black, not white. The dress was simple, severe, chosen for precision rather than allure. She stood beside Lucian as if it were the most natural place in the world, her hand resting lightly against his arm. Not possessive, not submissive. Present. Eyes followed them. Whispers bloomed and died. Phones were checked discreetly. Messages were sent. Lucian did not touch her unless necessary. When he did, it was brief and deliberate, a hand at her back to guide her through a crowd, fingers brushing her wrist as he leaned close to speak. The restraint was louder than any display of ownership. D'Ario would understand the message. On the drive back, Serafina watched the city blur past the window, her reflection faint against the dark glass. "You put a target on me," she said softly. Lucian did not deny it. "You were already marked," he replied. "Now he knows he can't move without consequence." She turned to face him. "And if he does anyway," Lucian met her gaze, unblinking. "Then he confirms what you already know." They returned to the house to find the atmosphere changed. Tighter. More alert. The guards' postures sharper, their movements faster. Something had shifted. Lucian's phone vibrated once. He checked the message, his expression unreadable. "He's escalating," he said, not with force, with proximity. Serafina's pulse quickened. "My mother." "Still protected," Lucian said, "but being watched more closely." Serafina nodded, absorbing the information. Fear moved through her, cold and insistent, but beneath it something steadier held. Determination. Clarity. "I won't disappear again," she said. Lucian studied her, his gaze lingering a fraction longer than usual. "Good," he replied, "because if you do, he wins." She understood then what had changed, not just in the war unfolding around them, but in herself. She was no longer reacting, she was choosing. And somewhere between the silk-lined cage and the open battlefield Lucian had drawn her onto, Serafina realized the truth she had been avoiding since the night she ran from her wedding. Being seen was dangerous, but being invisible had nearly killed her. Now, there would be no hiding, only forward. The city responded to Lucian's message the way it always did, quietly, cautiously, with rumors moving faster than truth. By the second morning after the public appearance, Serafina could feel the shift even before it reached her directly. Calls ended too quickly. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Names that had once been spoken casually were now avoided altogether. Power was recalibrating itself around the knowledge that Lucian DeSantis had brought Cassian Romano's missing daughter into the open and had not been punished for it. Dario Leone did not respond with violence. He responded with restraint. That was how Serafina knew he was planning something worse. Lucian read the silence the same way. He paced his study with measured steps, reviewing reports, adjusting security protocols, tightening the invisible net he was weaving. Serafina stayed near, listening, watching the lines form before they were drawn on any map. "He's waiting," she said quietly. Lucian glanced at her. "For what? For me to break?" Serafina replied. "Or for my father to—" The words lingered, heavy with implication. Cassian Romano had not contacted her since the night of the failed wedding. No accusations, no demands, just absence. That silence hurt more than any outburst would have. It was the silence of a man recalculating the worth of a daughter who had slipped beyond his control. Lucian understood that kind of silence intimately. The first crack appeared 3 days later. A secure line rang just after midnight. Lucian answered without hesitation, his expression hardening as the voice on the other end spoke. Serafina watched him carefully, reading the minute shifts in his posture, the way his jaw tightened. When he ended the call, he did not speak immediately. "They've moved your mother?" he said at last. Serafina's breath caught. "Where a different residence," Lucian replied. "More isolated, fewer staff, more control. That's not protection," Serafina said. "That's containment." Lucian nodded once. Cassian is feeling pressure. Dario is pushing him to keep his house in order. Serafina closed her eyes, forcing herself to remain still. This was the moment Dario had been waiting for, the point at which loyalty and fear collided inside a man like her father. "What do we do?" she asked. Lucian studied her, his gaze assessing more than strategy. "We force your father to choose." The meeting was arranged carefully, with the kind of precision that left nothing to chance. Neutral ground, witnesses, no weapons visible, though Serafina knew that was an illusion at best. Lucian insisted on being present. Cassian insisted on bringing Dario. That alone told Serafina everything she needed to know. Cassian Romano arrived first, his posture rigid, his expression carved into something unreadable. He did not look at his daughter when she entered, not immediately. When he finally did, the flicker of shock he failed to hide cut deeper than any accusation could have. "Serafina," he said, "you've caused quite a mess." She met his gaze evenly. "I saved my life." Cassian's mouth tightened. "You humiliated me." Lucian stepped forward then, his presence a silent boundary. "Your daughter prevented a war built on a lie," he said calmly. "You're welcome." Dario arrived last, as he always did, smiling easily, his hands open, his eyes warm in the way only dangerous men's eyes ever were. He greeted Serafina with practiced concern, as though he had not ordered her death days earlier. "There you are," he said softly. "We were worried." Serafina felt the room constrict. She did not respond. Lucian watched Dario with the interest of a predator encountering a rival who believed himself untouchable. The conversation began politely. It always did. Alliances, misunderstandings, the strain of public scrutiny. Cassian listened, nodding, his silence betraying nothing. Dario spoke with effortless charm, painting Serafina's disappearance as instability, confusion, stress. Lucian waited. When Serafina finally spoke, her voice was calm enough to surprise even herself. "You told Mateo Ruiz that I would be dead within a month." The room froze. Dario's smile did not falter. "You're upset," he said gently. "You heard something out of context." Lucian slid a folder across the table. "Word for word," he said. "And recorded." Cassian's hand stilled. Dario's eyes flicked to Lucian, calculating. "You're manufacturing evidence." Lucian leaned back, unbothered. "Then you won't mind an investigation." Cassian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough," he said. "I will handle this." There it was, the choice. Serafina watched her father's face, searching for recognition, for regret, for any sign that she was more than a complication to be managed. She found none. Dario smiled then, small and satisfied. Lucian saw it too. The aftermath was swift and brutal in its quietness. Cassian left with Dario. No arrests, no accusations. Only the promise of internal review and family discipline. Serafina returned to Lucian's car with her hands trembling. "He didn't believe me," she said. Lucian did not correct her. "He believed enough," he replied. "Just not enough to act yet." "That delay will kill someone," Serafina said. "Yes," Lucian agreed. "That's the point." That night, Serafina stood alone on the balcony, the sea black and endless beneath her. She understood now what Dario was doing. He was forcing her father into complicity, stretching the moment until silence became guilt. Lucian joined her without announcement. "He's setting you up as the problem," Lucian said. "The disruption, the liability?" Serafina nodded. "Then I stop being the thing he can dismiss." Lucian turned to her slowly. "What are you proposing?" She met his gaze, something fierce and steady burning behind her eyes. "I don't hide. I don't run. And I don't wait for my father to decide if I'm worth saving. Lucian studied her, a trace of something dangerous and approving flickering across his expression. That path costs blood, he said. I know. Serafina replied. Silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken understanding. Somewhere in the city, Dario Leone was preparing his next move. And for the first time, Serafina was not reacting to it. She was inviting it. The first shot was never fired in public. It came quietly, in the early hours before dawn, when the city still pretended to sleep and men made decisions they hoped would never need witnesses. Serafina felt it before she understood it, a tightening in the air, a pressure that made breathing feel deliberate rather than instinctive. She had learned to recognize that sensation in Lucian's house. It meant something irreversible had shifted. Lucian was already awake when the alert came through. He stood in the center of the study, jacket on, phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved into stillness. Serafina watched him from the doorway, reading the silence between his words more carefully than the words themselves. They crossed the line, he said when the call ended. Her spine straightened. Who? Lucian turned to her slowly. Dario. She did not ask how. She did not ask where. She already knew the answer would be something personal, something chosen to provoke rather than destroy outright. They tried to take my mother, she said. Lucian nodded once, intercepted 15 minutes before extraction. No injuries. Serafina's breath escaped her in a sharp exhale she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief was immediate, visceral and fleeting. Relief meant nothing if the attempt itself had been made. He won't try again quietly, she said. No, Lucian replied. He wanted you to know. The day that followed unfolded with ruthless efficiency. Lucian's house shifted into a state of controlled urgency. Security tightened. Routes altered. Names reassigned to faces Serafina had never seen before. She was not asked to stay out of sight. She was asked to stay close. Lucian kept her within arm's reach as meetings blurred into one another. Voices low and deliberate. Every decision weighed not only for outcome, but for message. Serafina listened, her thoughts racing ahead of what was said aloud. He's forcing escalation, she said during a pause, her voice steady. He wants you to strike first. Lucian's eyes flicked to her. Why? Because if you do, my father has an excuse to stand aside, she answered. If you become the aggressor, Cassian can claim neutrality without choosing me. Lucian regarded her for a long moment. And if I don't, then Dario will make the violence visible, Serafina said. He'll make it impossible to ignore. Lucian turned away, jaw tight. He understood the trap as clearly as she did. The attack came that night. Not against Lucian, not against her family, against a shipment. It was precise, surgical, designed to look like a warning rather than a declaration of war. A convoy intercepted just outside the city, guards disarmed but not killed, goods seized and vanished before authorities could be alerted. A message delivered without a single word spoken. Dario was done waiting. Lucian absorbed the report without visible reaction. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to be unsettling. Prepare a response, he said, measured, public. Serafina's pulse quickened. You're giving him what he wants. I'm giving him what he expects, Lucian corrected. There's a difference. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. And me. Lucian looked at her, then not as a strategist, not as leverage, but as a woman standing at the center of a storm she had helped summon. You're going to do something dangerous, he said. Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. I already am. Lucian did not smile back. You're going to appear. The plan unfolded quickly. A public event, unannounced until the last moment. Neutral ground, press present, a calculated risk designed to force Dario into visibility. Serafina understood immediately what it meant. If Dario moved, it would be in full view. If he did not, his restraint would speak louder than violence. Lucian's people objected, quietly, respectfully. They understood risk when they saw it. Lucian dismissed them all. Serafina dressed without assistance. She chose simplicity black again, severe lines, nothing that suggested vulnerability. When Lucian entered the room to escort her, his gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer than usual. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, she replied softly. I do. They arrived together, cameras already flashing as doors opened, and the city's attention snapped into focus. Whispers surged, disbelief rippling outward as Serafina Romano stepped into view alive, composed, and very much unbroken. Lucian stayed close but did not touch her. He let the space between them speak for itself. Serafina felt Dario before she saw him. The air shifted. The crowd adjusted unconsciously, making room. He appeared at the edge of the gathering, his expression carefully controlled, his eyes locking onto hers with unmistakable intent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Dario smiled. Not at Lucian, at her. The message was clear. I see you, and I am not finished. Serafina held his gaze without flinching. Lucian felt the shift beside her, the subtle tension that meant movement had been anticipated. Security closed ranks imperceptibly. The crowd buzzed, unaware of how close it stood to violence. Dario raised a glass in her direction, a mockery of a toast. Lucian leaned in just enough for his voice to reach her alone. This is the point of no return, he said. Serafina's heart hammered, but her voice did not waver. It passed the night he tried to take my mother. Dario turned away without approaching them, slipping back into the crowd as smoothly as he had arrived. No confrontation, no blood. But the message had been delivered. On the drive back, silence filled the car, heavy and charged. Serafina stared out the window, watching the city blur past, understanding crystallizing into something sharp and unyielding. He's going to come for me directly now, she said. Lucian did not deny it. Yes. She turned to him. Then stop trying to protect me from the war. Lucian met her gaze, something dark and resolute settling behind his eyes. I don't protect what I can't afford to lose, he said. The words were not a confession. Not yet. But as the house came into view and the gates closed behind them, Serafina understood the truth with startling clarity. Dario Leone had stopped maneuvering around her. The hunt had begun, and this time, she was no longer prey. After the night Dario Leone looked at Serafina as if she were no longer protected by distance, Lucian DeSantis stopped pretending restraint was an option. The war did not announce itself with gunfire. It began with absences. A meeting canceled without explanation. A shipment delayed by hours that mattered. Names that vanished from Lucian's briefings as if they had never existed at all. Power withdrew before it struck, and those who understood the language of survival recognized the warning for what it was. Serafina noticed the change in Lucian before anyone else did. He slept less, spoke less. When he did speak, his words were stripped to essentials, decisions delivered with surgical clarity. He no longer asked for confirmation. He issued outcomes, and yet he did not push her away. If anything, he kept her closer within sight, within reach, as if distance itself had become a liability. Serafina understood the contradiction immediately. Lucian trusted her judgment, but the closer she stood to him, the more exposed she became. You're moving pieces, she said quietly one night as they stood over a map spread across his desk. Not just against Dario. Lucian's gaze did not leave the markings. No, you're looking inward. Yes, she traced one of the routes with her finger, stopping at a point just outside the city. You've had a leak since before I arrived. Lucian's jaw tightened. I suspected. But now you're certain. He looked at her then, something sharp and approving in his eyes. You see patterns even when you're afraid. I'm more dangerous when I'm afraid. Serafina replied. The confirmation came before dawn. Lucian's lieutenant, the same man whose stillness Serafina had noticed days earlier, was intercepted attempting to leave the city with encrypted files and cash. No resistance, no denials, only the quiet acceptance of a man who knew the game had ended. The name meant little to Serafina. The betrayal did. Lucian did not raise his voice when the man was brought before him. He did not threaten. He did not ask questions he did not already know the answers to. You sold timing, Lucian said evenly. Roots, gaps. You sold just enough to make sure the knife landed where it would hurt. The man swallowed. I was promised protection. Lucian's mouth curved faintly. You were promised survival. There's a difference. The punishment was swift and private. When Lucian returned to his study, his sleeves rolled back, his expression unchanged. Serafina did not ask what had been done. She did not need to. The mask had come off. Dario responded within hours. This time, he did not test Lucian's perimeter or probe his supply lines. He went straight for what Serafina had always known he would use when subtlety failed. Her mother disappeared. Not violently, not publicly. One moment she was under protection. The next she was gone, her guards disarmed without bloodshed. Her residence emptied with careful efficiency. Serafina felt the loss like a physical blow. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She stood very still, the way she had learned to stand in rooms where weakness invited predators. Lucian received the news without visible reaction, but something lethal settled into the room around him. "He wants you to come alone," Lucian said. Serafina's head snapped up. "No, he wants you to believe that," Lucian corrected. "He wants you desperate enough to ignore the trap." "I won't," she said, "but I won't let him keep her either." Lucian stepped closer, his presence a solid weight in front of her. "This is where people die," he said quietly, "because they confuse courage with isolation." Serafina met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear burning beneath it. "Then don't isolate me." Silence stretched between them, taut and charged. Lucian exhaled slowly. "He's not asking for a meeting," he said. "He's asking for surrender. And you don't surrender." Serafina said. "No," Lucian replied. "I bait." The plan was brutal in its elegance. Lucian would leak false compliance just enough to draw Dario into revealing the location where he believed himself untouchable. Serafina would appear to acquiesce publicly, playing the role Dario had always expected of her, the daughter returning to the line she had crossed. Privately, Lucian prepared an extraction. Serafina understood the cost immediately. "If this fails," she said, "he'll kill her." Lucian did not look away. "If we don't act," he replied, "he'll use her until you break." The choice was not between safety and danger. It was between controlled risk and certain ruin. Serafina nodded once. "Then I'll give him what he thinks he's won." The message went out before dusk. Serafina Romano would meet Dario Leone alone. Lucian watched the city react in real time, movements shifting, channels lighting up, fear and anticipation bleeding into one another. Dario's confidence was palpable even through secondhand reports. He believed the narrative had finally bent back into its proper shape. The meeting place was chosen for symbolism as much as secrecy, an old coastal estate abandoned years ago. Neutral ground layered with memories of past alliances and broken ones. Serafina arrived dressed in pale gray, her expression composed, her steps measured. She did not look like a woman walking into a trap. She looked like a woman returning to an obligation. Dario greeted her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "There you are," he said softly. "I knew you'd remember where you belong." Serafina held his gaze. "Where my family is," she corrected. He laughed quietly. "Always bargaining. Even now." He gestured toward the house. "Shall we?" She took one step forward and felt it then. The shift in the air. The subtle tightening that meant Lucian's people were in position. Serafina slowed her breath. This was the moment everything balanced on. Dario leaned in, lowering his voice. "Lucian can't save you from this," he said. "He'll trade you when it suits him." Serafina met his eyes, something calm and unyielding settling over her fear. "You misunderstand," she replied. "I'm not the thing being traded anymore." The first shot echoed through the estate, not from inside. From the perimeter, chaos erupted instantly, guards scattering, shouts tearing through the stillness, the illusion of control collapsing in seconds. Dario's smile vanished as understanding dawned too late. Lucian DeSantis stepped into view like a force made manifest, his presence snapping the world into brutal clarity. The masks were gone, and there would be no returning to them. The first shot did not kill anyone. That was intentional. Lucian DeSantis never opened a battle with blood unless he intended to end it the same way. This shot was a declaration, not an execution. It shattered glass, sent bodies diving for cover, tore away the illusion of control Dario Leone had wrapped himself in for years. Chaos spread through the coastal estate in seconds. Serafina did not scream. She did not run blindly. She moved exactly as Lucian had taught her to 2 steps back. Angle her body, eyes up, breath steady. The world narrowed to sound and motion, to the weight of danger pressing in from every direction. Dario cursed sharply, grabbing her wrist as bullets tore into stone nearby. "You planned this," he snarled. Serafina twisted free, her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. "You planned my death first?" Lucian appeared through the smoke like something inevitable. His men moved with lethal precision, cutting off exits, disarming guards, forcing the fight inward instead of outward. This was not a massacre. It was containment. Lucian's gaze locked onto Serafina instantly, scanning for injury. When he saw none, something imperceptible eased in his posture. That moment of relief cost him. A gunshot cracked from the upper level, sharper, closer. Lucian turned just as a bullet grazed his shoulder, the impact snapping him back a step. Blood darkened the fabric of his jacket almost immediately. Serafina's breath hitched. "Lucian!" He waved her off even as one of his men moved to cover him. "I'm fine," he said, his voice ironed flat. "Get her out." But Dario was already moving, desperation sharpening his instincts. He grabbed Serafina again, this time dragging her toward the far corridor where the shadows thickened. "Walk," he hissed, "or she dies." Lucian froze. The estate seemed to hold its breath. Serafina felt the gun press against her ribs, cold and absolute. She could hear Dario's breathing, now ragged, uneven. Fear had finally cracked his composure. Lucian's eyes met hers across the distance. In them, she saw calculation collide with something far more dangerous. Attachment. "Let her go," Lucian said quietly. Dario laughed, sharp and brittle. "Or what you shoot and kill her yourself." Lucian did not answer immediately. His silence stretched, taut with possibility. Serafina understood what was happening before anyone else did. This was the moment. The moment Lucian DeSantis would decide whether she was still a strategic asset or something that broke his rules. Lucian lifted his gun. Every instinct in Serafina screamed. Not fear of death she had made peace with that long ago, but the realization that if he pulled the trigger now, it would mean something irreversible. But Lucian did not aim at Dario. He aimed at the wall. The shot exploded into stone, sending shards into Dario's face. The man cried out, loosening his grip just enough. Serafina moved. She drove her elbow back hard, twisting free as Lucian's men surged forward. The corridor erupted in motion shouts. Gunfire, bodies colliding. Lucian advanced despite the blood soaking his sleeve, his focus singular, lethal. Dario tried to run. He didn't make it far. Lucian's shot took him in the leg, sending him crashing to the floor. He screamed, scrambling uselessly as Lucian closed the distance. Gun trained steadily on his chest. Silence fell in the aftermath, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant sound of waves. Lucian stood over Dario, his expression unreadable. "This ends now." Dario spat, pain twisting his features. "Kill me. Finish it." Lucian looked down at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his gun. "No," he said. "This ends when everyone sees you fall." Dario's face contorted in disbelief. "You're making a mistake." Lucian glanced back at Serafina. She stood a few steps behind him, shaken but unbroken, her gaze steady on the man who had ordered her death. "This," Lucian said calmly, "is me choosing." Dario was taken alive. The extraction of Serafina's mother happened simultaneously, swift and brutal in its efficiency. By the time the sun began to rise over the coast, the estate was silent again, stripped of its illusions and its power. Back at Lucian's house, the doctors worked quietly, stitching the wound in his shoulder. Serafina waited nearby, her hands clenched together, the adrenaline slowly draining from her system. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly once they were alone. Lucian looked at her. "Which part letting him live?" She replied. "Or choosing me?" Lucian studied her, his gaze stripped of calculation for the first time since she had known him. "Both," he said, "by every rule I've lived by." And yet, Serafina asked. "And yet," he continued, "killing him would have been easy. Losing you would not." The words settled between them, heavy and unmistakable. Serafina felt something shift, not relief, not triumph, but the sobering weight of what his choice meant. "You've made yourself vulnerable," she said. "Yes," Lucian replied. "And in my world, that's dangerous." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "In mine, it's human." Lucian's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something close enough to matter. Outside, the city stirred, unaware that one of its most powerful rules had just been broken. Lucian DeSantis had chosen not to win the war the easy way. He had chosen her, and that choice would change everything that followed. The city did not wake to sirens. It woke to silence, the kind that followed a violent truth finally settling into place. By midday, everyone who mattered knew what had happened at the coastal estate. Dario Leone was alive, wounded, and no longer untouchable. His disappearance from public view was not framed as defeat, but it might as well have been. In this world, survival without power was a slower kind of death. Lucian DeSantis controlled the narrative with the same precision he controlled everything else. There were no grand announcements, no displays of dominance. Information leaked the way water seeped through stone, inevitable, shaping the ground beneath it. Records surfaced, timelines aligned. Witnesses, long silent, began to remember details they had once sworn they never noticed. At the center of it all stood Serafina Romano, alive, unhidden, unapologetic. Lucian did not shield her from the aftermath. He stood beside her instead, close enough to make his position unmistakable, distant enough to let her speak for herself when she chose to. She understood the balance immediately. This was not protection. This was recognition. The meeting with Cassian Romano took place 3 days later. No press, no spectacle, just a room, a table, and the weight of a lifetime of expectation pressing in from every direction. Serafina entered without hesitation, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Lucian remained outside, by design. This confrontation belonged to her. Cassian looked older than she remembered. Not frail, but diminished, his certainty cracked by the undeniable evidence that now lay spread before him. Reports, recordings, testimonies that stripped away Dario's charm layer by layer until only cruelty and ambition remained. "You endangered us all," Cassian said, his voice hoarse. Serafina met his gaze calmly. "You endangered me first." The words landed with quiet force. Cassian's hands trembled as he reached for a document, then stilled. "You should have trusted me." Serafina did not raise her voice. "I trusted you to listen. You chose not to." Silence stretched between them, heavy and irrevocable. Cassian exhaled slowly, the sound carrying the weight of something breaking beyond repair. "I made a mistake," he said at last. It was not an apology. It was the closest he could come. Serafina accepted it for what it was and what it was not. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting without asking permission. Outside, Lucian waited. He said nothing as she joined him, but his gaze searched her face with a care he no longer bothered to hide. "It's done," she said simply. Lucian nodded. "Then we move forward." Moving forward did not mean peace. Dario's empire collapsed in fragments rather than flames. Allies defected. Assets froze. His name became synonymous with miscalculation. He remained alive long enough to watch everything he had built slip from his grasp. Piece by piece, Lucian ensured it. Serafina watched the dismantling from a distance she had earned. She was consulted, not commanded, asked, not ordered. The difference mattered more than she had expected. But something else demanded her attention now. Her mother and sister returned to her side under Lucian's protection, shaken but unharmed. The reunion was quiet, fiercely private. Serafina held them both longer than she ever had before, grounding herself in the reality of their warmth, their breathing. When she stepped back into Lucian's world afterward, she did so changed. "You don't owe me anything," Lucian said one evening as they stood overlooking the city, the lights below pulsing like a living thing. Serafina studied him, the man who had bent his own rules for her, who had chosen exposure over certainty. "I know," she replied. "That's why this matters." He turned to face her fully then, his expression serious, unguarded in a way that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "This life," he said, "will never be safe. Not with me. I don't need safe, Serafina said quietly. I need honest. Lucian held her gaze, something steady and resolute settling behind his eyes. Then you stay because you choose to. Not because you're protected. Not because you're afraid. Serafina nodded once. Yes. The decision did not feel like surrender. It felt like ownership. Of herself. Of her future. Of the line she had crossed and refused to step back over. That night, as the city hummed beneath them and the past loosened its grip, Serafina understood the truth that had carried her this far. She had not survived because she was saved. She had survived because she had seen the truth and refused to look away. And standing beside Lucian DeSantis, no longer hidden, no longer disposable, she knew the final chapter would not be about rescue or revenge. It would be about choice, and the consequences of claiming it. The city learned to breathe again. Not because danger had vanished, Lucian DeSantis' world did not allow for that illusion, but because the shape of power had settled into something recognizable, predictable, controlled. Dario Leone's name faded from whispered conversations, replaced by cautionary silence. What remained was not peace, but order. In this city, that was the closest thing to it. Serafina felt the change most acutely in the mornings. She woke without the jolt of dread that had once lived beneath her skin. Without the instinct to catalog exits before opening her eyes, the house still carried the weight of vigilance guards, protocols, the constant low hum of awareness, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place where she had chosen to stand. Lucian watched her notice these things and said nothing. He did not ask her to stay. He never would. The absence of pressure was deliberate, and she understood the respect embedded in it. Lucian DeSantis did not bind what chose him freely. Their partnership evolved quietly, almost invisibly to those watching from the outside. Serafina sat in on meetings when insight was needed, stepped away when it was not. She learned where her presence sharpened outcomes and where it softened them. Lucian adjusted without comment. His trust expressed not in declarations, but in access. They did not rush what lay between them. There were no dramatic confessions, no promises made in the heat of aftermath. What formed instead was something steadier glances that lingered a moment longer than necessary, conversations that stretched into silence without discomfort, the shared understanding that neither of them needed to fill every space with words. One evening, weeks after the last of Dario's holdings were dismantled, Serafina stood on the terrace overlooking the city. The lights below flickered like constellations, distant and alive. Lucian joined her without announcement, the familiar weight of his presence settling beside her. "You could leave," he said quietly. She did not turn. "Yes, you would be safe," he continued. "Anonymous, if you wanted. I could make that happen." Serafina finally looked at him. "And you," Lucian met her gaze evenly. "I would continue. The honesty of it mattered more than any reassurance." He was not offering escape wrapped in romance. He was offering truth, unsoftened. Serafina considered the city below the place that had tried to erase her, the place she had refused to disappear from. She thought of her mother, rebuilding a life that would never fully return to what it had been. Of her sister, learning to stand without borrowed certainty. Of herself, finally inhabiting a future she had chosen rather than inherited. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. Lucian waited. "I'm staying," Serafina continued, "because this is where I became myself." Something shifted in his expression, then subtle, unguarded. Not surprise, recognition. He nodded once. "Then stay," he said. "On your terms." They did not touch. They did not need to. The agreement was already complete. Time moved forward, as it always did. Serafina began designing again, not gowns meant to please families or seal alliances, but pieces shaped by intent and freedom. Lucian supported her without interference, providing resources when asked, distance when not. He attended her first private showing without announcement, standing at the back of the room as she spoke with quiet confidence to people who listened because they wanted to, not because they feared her name. When she found him afterward, he did not praise the work. He said something better. "They see you." He said, "Yes," Serafina replied. "And they can't use me." Lucian's mouth curved faintly. Good. The intimacy between them deepened, not through grand gestures, but through accumulation shared nights spent over maps and quiet laughter, the unspoken comfort of presence, the trust of turning one's back without fear. When Lucian finally reached for her hand, it was not in possession or claim. It was an invitation. She took it without hesitation. There were moments when the world reminded them of its nature, threats neutralized before they surfaced, alliances renegotiated under careful terms, the constant awareness that power always invited challenge. Through it all, Serafina remained beside Lucian not as shield or symbol, but as choice. And Lucian remained beside her not as savior, but as equal. On a night much like the one that had begun everything, Serafina stood at the window, watching the dark water below. Lucian came to her quietly, his reflection faint in the glass beside hers. "Do you ever think about the wedding?" he asked. She considered the question, then shook her head. "I think about the life I almost accepted," she said. "And the one I didn't." Lucian studied her, something softened and fierce coexisting in his gaze. "I don't make promises," he said. "I know," Serafina replied. "But I make choices," he continued. She turned to face him fully, her voice calm and certain. "So do I." They stood there together, the city stretching out beneath them, neither owned nor conquered, only lived in. There was no declaration to mark their ending, no vows spoken aloud. Only this two people who had survived being reduced to leverage, who had chosen truth over comfort, and who now shared a future defined not by rescue or domination, but by mutual recognition. In a world built on power and fear, that choice was its own kind of happy ending. And it was enough.